The loss of a sibling. This is still something I struggle to internally comprehend, never mind express with words, but this is now my reality, and in some ways, what feels like my most defining feature as I navigate my way through each new stage of life. Such a loss brings an emotional roller coaster that you've unwillingly boarded for life. Some parts more turbulent than others. In many ways, it feels like it was only yesterday that they were here. In others, it feels like a lifetime ago, as the fear of forgetting their face or voice grows yet stronger. The loss of a sibling. This is not something I thought I would ever have to consider, at least not until later on in life. But today, more than ever, I would like to try and share my experience of being a bereaved sibling, as I feel it is sometimes a group which is slightly left in the shadows. This week marks the 5th anniversary of the death of my sister Liberty, or as known by her friends and family, Libs. Libs was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma on the 26th of September 2016, her 13th birthday, and a day which should have been a milestone for so many different reasons. This was following 18 months of misdiagnosis with shin splints, amongst other things. She was quickly subjected to chemo, high-dose chemo, limb salvage surgery, radiotherapy, and the list goes on. All the horrors that many of us in this room unfortunately know all too well. After just over a year of treatment, we were told that the cancer had returned and metastasized. There was no more that could be done. If I had to summarize just briefly Lib's character during this time, my first thoughts would be resilience, determination, and an unwavering sense of humor, which lifted those around her, from her family to her medical team, even in the darkest of moments. At the time of her diagnosis, I was only 15 and was studying for my GCSE exams, which I eventually sat whilst Libs was receiving treatment. This made things particularly difficult as I was unable to be with her as much as I would have liked, or when I was able to visit, I had to study from the hospital. As Liv spent a large amount of time as an inpatient during this year, I spent a lot of time at home alone whilst my parents were juggling trying to work or caring for my sister in hospital. My 16th birthday also fell in the same week as her limb salvage surgery, thus I was not able to spend it with my family. I think it was in moments such as these that it really kicked in how drastically our lives had changed and the extent of the necessary focus being placed on my sister. I also had to contend with the pressure of performing well and focusing on what were, at the time, the most important exams of my life, whilst knowing that my sister was struggling in hospital and I didn't have the physical presence of my parents. As a bereaved siblings who have witnessed a loved one suffer immensely during an extended period, a trauma that no child should have to experience nor witness, a sense of maturity and responsibility is bestowed upon us as we are forced to step up in an attempt to support our parents, be strong for our siblings receiving treatment, and exposed in the rawest form to the pain and cruelty that life can bring. For many of us, we have never seen such vulnerability from our parents before, who we find crying when they think they are alone, or who seek our comfort when they are delivered with yet another devastating piece of news. Naturally, maturity is usually considered as a positive trait to possess. And if anything positive can be taken from my experience of childhood bereavement, it would perhaps be that. However, in many other ways, at a young age, such maturity can be a very isolating trait. Suddenly, the stupidness of messing about with your friends is no longer so funny. The standard rite of passage of crying over a boy becomes insignificant and pathetic. You feel boring, misunderstood, and at a loss to your place in the world. According to your friends, you aren't the same as you used to be. Often friends, understandably, can't comprehend such a great loss, or even don't want to, and would prefer to remain in the comfort of the unknown. When you hear the complaints of their siblings taking their clothes or the boring family holidays they are obliged to go on this weekend, the sense of jealousy and even anger can be overwhelming. Why isn't it still me? They don't realize how lucky they are. But as I try to remind myself, everyone's biggest problem is their biggest problem until there arrives something bigger. That's not to say that sympathy isn't sometimes difficult. There is a sense of bereavement, not just for your sibling, but the childhood that you shared. In many ways, their death marks the end of your childhood, at least as you once knew it. The jokes and mischiefs you share with a sibling that center you within your most childlike self, I imagine even into adulthood, slowly begin to fade with each year that they are no longer here, and there is a part of you which they take with them. When considering the bereavement of a sibling, you also have to consider the bereavement of the family unit and dynamic as it once was. In physical form, we converted from a family of 4 to a family of 3. Family meals, family holidays, family movie nights would never be the same again. Each major milestone or celebration carries with it a massive lib-sized hole, which can easily result in the detestation of the moments which you once loved and that brought you your happiest memories. The question when meeting new people, so have you got any siblings, now carries such weight. For me, the answer will always be yes. I have a sister, I am a sister, and I always will be. I will continue to protect and advocate for her, as I always would have, even though in a different form, as she is no longer physically here. To convey that message to a stranger, however, proves much more difficult, not wanting to overwhelm them with your depressing life or the awkwardness of making someone cry, a reaction I've had many of the times when saying that Libs is no longer here. Despite the great recent advances that have been made in mental health awareness and understanding, for me, society's handling of grief is somewhat limited. The cliches we so often hear, it gets easier with time, or they're in a better place, are still so prominent. Even though that I respect, it is often told with the best intentions to provide comfort. This lack of understanding was epitomised when I sat my GCSEs and my A-levels, and my school attempted to apply for special consideration for me. For context, Libs had passed away in my first few weeks of sixth form. Even when I wasn't physically present in class, I often mentally felt absent, and still do to this day, I struggle to recall a lot of the information from the 2 years following her death. It was as though my memory had just shut down, but the relationship between grief and memory is a whole other conversation. However, under the extenuating circumstances guideline, grief is only considered a valid circumstance for 6 months, meaning by the time I sat my exams, I would not be eligible. The education system was telling me that within 6 months, I should no longer be affected by the death of my sister. Grief has no time frame. It is a notion beyond self-control. Some days you feel strong and motivated to tackle life head-on. Other days are cold and dark with the simplest of tasks feeling overwhelming. Navigating your youth and early adulthood can be challenging enough without the added weight of grief, and societal reform to acknowledge this could transform, for the better, the lives of bereaved siblings. Just to feel understood and that your emotions are valid can make all the difference. Paired with the lack of specific support for siblings and my struggle to find anyone in the same situation or stage of life as myself, I often reverted to the suppression of emotion as the best and easiest coping mechanism. That's not to say I ever stopped talking about Libs. If anything, as a family, we've always been very transparent when it comes to the sharing of memories and keeping her spirit alive in that sense, something for which I know we are very lucky, as for some families, this type of communication can be difficult. What I did, however, do is prevent myself from feeling grief. I still had a life, I still had a future. It was Libs who didn't, thus it was selfish and wrong to be sad or even complain when I felt unwell. She has experienced so much worse. In many ways, I felt a responsibility to live for her. I instead adopted a forced sense of positivity, particularly when around my friends, most appropriately summarized with the life is too short attitude. But as someone once told me, we are like bottles of Coke. Each time we suppress an emotion, the bottle is shaken again, until suddenly, one day, the lid is released and it explodes. Whilst I don't profess to be an expert, I have started to learn from my mistakes and learned the importance of not suppressing, but feeling these emotions. Finding healthy outlets which allow you to remember the past without being consumed by it. This includes setting up a special fund with BCRT, which has allowed my family to direct our emotions and energies into something meaningful, whilst also fulfilling Lib's wish that we raise funds in her name and keep her memory alive. I mentioned previously the sense of obligation to live for her. Loss of self and personal identity can be a major factor faced for bereaved siblings. The loss of a young life sends waves through entire communities, and in so many instances, I was referred to as the girl whose sister had died of cancer, or Liberty's sister, not by my own name. Above everything, on that day of October 11th, 2017, I lost my best friend, the person with whom I thought I would do it all. The first person with whom I still want to share my highest highs and my lowest lows, the person I could laugh with until I couldn't breathe anymore, or the person who could frustrate me more than I knew was possible, until that same laughter returned just 5 minutes later. The type of unconditional love so unique to a sibling relationship that it feels irreplaceable. This was something she was robbed of. Robbed of proms, learning to drive, graduations, weddings, being aunties to each other's children. We, as a family, were robbed of her, the person who I thought I would do life with. But for this reason, Libs truly was the most incredible person I have ever, and I'm sure ever will meet. And for this, I couldn't be prouder to call her my sister. As hard as it has been to lose her, through this experience, she has taught me the most valuable life lessons anyone ever could. And for that, I am eternally grateful. While she may not be here physically anymore, I will forever carry with me the best of her strength, courage, and outrageous sense of humour. And as per her one dying wish, she will never be forgotten. Thank you.